Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to the Explainer. When most of us hear phrases like the people of God or the church, our minds pretty much immediately fast forward to the New Testament, right? But to genuinely understand the grand, sweeping narrative of the biblical text, we have to recognize that the concept of God's people actually begins way, way earlier. It starts in the Old Testament. So today, we're going to explore the absolutely fascinating ancient roots of this concept by looking at the specific ways God interacted with humanity throughout early biblical history.
To truly grasp this epic history, we're going to follow a chronological journey. We'll start with beginnings at creation and the fall, move on to Noah and preserving the earth, Abraham's salvation covenant, Moses and the law as a gift, and finally wrap things up with a superior new covenant.
All right, Section 1, Beginnings, focusing on creation and the fall.
Let's move to and see how this builds across our macro-historical timeline. The text tells us God created the cosmos ex nihilo, which literally means out of nothing. But when you zoom in, the story intimately focuses on a highly localized setting, the Garden of Eden. Here, at the very beginning, Adam and Eve are created in the image of God. Then, generations later, a global flood totally resets the stage. Centuries after that, a massive promise is made in Canaan. And finally, 400 years later, the law is given at Mount Sinai. Keeping this chronological map in your head is absolutely crucial because it shows us that God's plan wasn't just random. It unfolded in very distinct historical eras. But to understand those eras, we really have to understand the disaster that set them in motion. As the source text points out, a dark power, represented by the serpent, infiltrated Eden. And what was the serpent's main tactic? It was a direct denial of God's judgment. The serpent basically convinced humanity that there would be zero consequences for rebellion. Well, they rebelled, and the consequences were, frankly, catastrophic. In fact, this creates the single most important division in the entire biblical story. It's actually not the divide between the Old and New Testaments. It's the divide between pre-fall versus post-fall. Humanity goes from complete innocence, life, and direct communion with God to spiritual death, guilt, profound corruption, and total alienation. Because of this catastrophic post-fall reality, God had to establish a completely new way to interact with an alienated humanity. And he does this primarily through what are called covenants. So what is a covenant? It's essentially a formalized relationship inaugurated by God. It features very specific promises that obligate him to his people and them to him. Think of it kind of like a divine binding treaty. Getting a handle on this concept is literally the key that unlocks the rest of our historical journey. Which brings us to Section 2, Noah and the preservation of the earth.
Following the fall, humanity's corruption didn't just linger, it completely metastasized. The text describes this universal treachery, a widespread wickedness, where human thoughts were just continually evil. And that universal corruption is the specific problem that led to the devastating biblical flood. But here's the thing. The flood isn't the end of the story. It's the backdrop for the Noahic covenant. And it is incredibly important to note that this covenant is not about spiritual salvation, not at all. Instead, it is a firm promise to physically preserve the earth, its ecology, and humanity itself, despite our ongoing rebellious nature. It guarantees that the natural order, things like seasons and harvests, will continue. It's basically the physical stage setting required for the actual drama of redemption to take place.
And that drama of redemption kicks off in Section 3, Abraham and the Salvation Covenant. If Noah's covenant was all about preserving the physical earth, the shift to Abraham is monumental. God called Abraham out of this idolatrous background to make some truly stunning promises to him, promises of land, of descendants, and of becoming a blessing to all the families of the earth. The very core of this new covenant is brilliantly captured in Genesis 15:6. And Abraham believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. This is a foundational moment. In fact, the New Testament quotes this exact verse 3 separate times, in Romans, Galatians, and James. Why? To prove that justification by faith isn't some new concept invented way later. It is the absolute bedrock of the Abrahamic covenant. Abraham simply believed, and God credited it to him. But how exactly was this covenant formalized? Well, it gets a little bizarre and, honestly, a bit eerie here. God instructs Abraham to perform this ancient Near Eastern land grant ritual. Abraham literally cuts sacrificial animals in half and sets the severed pieces opposite one another, creating this pathway of blood. Now, in the ancient world, both parties making a treaty would walk down this pathway together. By doing so, they were invoking a curse on themselves, essentially saying, hey, may what happened to these animals happen to me if I break my pledge. Now, what's really interesting about this is the concept of a monergistic action.
While Abraham set up the ritual, a deep, terrifying sleep fell over him. He was completely out cold. God, symbolized by a smoking firepot and a flaming torch, passed between those severed animals entirely alone. It was monergistic, meaning it was an action accomplished by one party alone. This means God took the entire burden of the curse upon himself if the covenant was ever broken. God took on all the risk to ensure the salvation of his people. It is just a staggering visual of grace.
And we carry that theme of grace right into Section 4, Moses and the Law as a Gift. Okay, we need to execute a major myth-busting pivot right here. We often instinctively view the Old Testament law quite negatively, right? We think of it as strict, cold, and condemning. But in its actual historical context for the Israelites who received it, the Mosaic covenant was considered a massive, gracious gift. Dr. Peterson's analysis outlines 5 specific ways this covenant gifted God's people. First off, it was founded on redemptive grace. Second, it represented the particular election of Israel. God chose them out of all the nations. Third, it completely defined their identity, turning them into a kingdom of priests. Fourth, the incredibly dramatic events at Sinai showcased God's majestic attributes, like his justice and holiness. And fifth, it formed the absolute nucleus of scriptural ethics. The 10 Commandments provided a clear, solid structure for human flourishing.
If you ever doubt for a second that the law was rooted in grace, just look at the preamble to the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Notice the order there. God didn't give them the rules and say, okay, obey these and then I'll save you from Egypt. No way. He saved them first. The rules of the Mosaic Law came out of that loving rescue. It was a practical guide for how a newly freed people should live.
Which brings us to our final section, a superior new covenant. While the law given to Moses was a remarkable gift, the biblical text definitely points toward a future new covenant that entirely eclipses it. And this brilliantly illustrates how the Apostle Paul contrasted the two eras. He describes the Old Covenant as the letter that kills and brings condemnation. In stark contrast, the New Covenant is the Spirit that gives life and brings righteousness. Now you might be asking yourself, wait, if the law was a gift, why does Paul say it kills? Well, the source text makes an absolutely crucial point here. The fault wasn't with the law itself. The law was holy. The fault lay with the rebellious people who continually broke it.
And that right there summarizes the core tragedy of the Old Testament people of God. The ancient Israelites failed because they fundamentally misunderstood what they had been given. They separated the rules of Moses from the grace of Abraham. Instead of relying on God's redemptive grace and trusting him the way Abraham did, they treated the law as a hopeless end in itself. They tried to perfectly keep the law through their own sheer willpower, using what the text calls uncircumcised hearts.
Which leaves us with an incredibly profound and provocative theological question to end on today. We've seen the pre-fall innocence, the Noahic preservation, the Abrahamic promise, and the Mosaic law. But if humanity, with its uncircumcised heart, consistently breaks its end of the covenant, despite all of God's gracious gifts, how will God finally heal that heart? That right there is the ultimate tension of the Old Testament, and it perfectly sets the stage for the answers waiting to be discovered in the New.